Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you was never meant to survive the polite porcelain mask of British high society. In the first 8 seconds, I want you to imagine this. A dim, suffocating room in Bristol, 1969. A corpse on a kitchen floor. A chicken bone lodged in the throat of a woman the world believed had already died decades earlier. They called her Mrs. Dennis, a harmless old lady with a fading memory. But the truth? That dead woman once held the keys to power corridors that stretched from Highclere Castle to the tomb of a forgotten pharaoh. And the lies she buried, adultery, secret deals, illegal procedures whispered behind velvet curtains, were powerful enough to ruin the British Empire's polished myth of moral superiority. You're not here for gossip. You're here for what lies beneath it, the mechanisms of control, the hidden deals, the quiet ways power protects itself. And Lady Almina Carnarvon. She was not just a woman. She was a weapon, a symbol of how the elite recycle reputations, mask sins with silver spoons, and rewrite history to hide their deepest contamination. Her life didn't start in nobility. It started in scandal, the illegitimate child of a banking titan whose family controlled governments and gold with the same cold precision. Alfred de Rothschild didn't just bankroll empires. He manipulated them. And Almina, she was his loophole, a living asset, a bargaining chip crafted for aristocratic salvation. So when she married the bankrupt 5th Earl of Carnarvon, the newspapers celebrated a romance. But understand this, nothing about that marriage was love. It was a transaction, power for money, legitimacy for influence, heritage for control. Highclere Castle needed rescuing, and Alfred's fortune purchased a title for a daughter who wasn't supposed to exist. This is the part they never teach you in history books. Aristocracy wasn't about elegance or refinement. It was an economy of secrets. And Almina learned quickly that purity was fiction, while corruption had lineage. The soldiers she healed, the men she seduced, the babies quietly erased behind the locked doors of her nursing homes, every act was another brick in the empire of shadows she built to maintain her position. Respectability was the costume. Manipulation was the craft. And power, real power, was always taken, never given. Lean closer, because from here on, every revelation drags you deeper. And what comes next? It's darker than anything she left behind in that modest Bristol house. Now, let's peel back the polished velvet of Highclere Castle and expose the rot beneath. Picture 5,000 acres of manicured lawns, Gothic spires clawing at the sky, servants scuttling like ghosts in endless corridors. The world saw grandeur. Few realized that every stone, every gilded frame, was mortgaged to survival. The Earl was broke, drowning in debt, clinging to a heritage that could not sustain itself. And Almina? She arrived like a lifeboat carrying millions, an illegitimate daughter of banking royalty, whose fortune would restore a crumbling dynasty. But what the world didn't know was that her inheritance came with strings darker than any Gothic shadow. In the early 1900s, she orchestrated a society of whispers and invisible contracts, a network that allowed her to manipulate men, institutions, even governments. Aristocrats, ministers, officers of the crown, all drawn into her orbit, either seduced or intimidated. No one dared cross her. She was polite, charitable, and elegant, but behind the etiquette, she operated a system of quiet terror. The ability to erase lives, to manipulate births and deaths, to decide whose legacy survived and whose reputation was crushed. And yes, the rumors you've only half heard are true. Illegal procedures were performed under her supervision. In the gilded nursing rooms she controlled, young women disappeared, only to emerge with their bodies altered, their secrets erased, their shame kept silent. Almina was not a midwife of mercy. She was an architect of control. Each act reinforced her dominion. Each discreet operation whispered a warning to the aristocracy. Your virtue is mine to weaponize. And yet, she cultivated an image of philanthropy. Soldiers returning from war, wounded and broken, found themselves in her care, enveloped in gratitude, unaware that loyalty was not owed to compassion, but to leverage. Every touch, every favor, every whispered promise of aid carried with it invisible chains. She learned early that power hides in paradox. cruelty dressed as charity, manipulation cloaked as kindness. Remember this and comment it twice if you understand what I'm about to teach. Shadows reveal the true throne. Say it once. And again. This is not ritual. It is identity. Those who speak it aloud begin to see the invisible levers of influence in ways the world does not intend. By the time she was in her 20s, Almina had mastered an art few ever understand. How to inhabit a life that outwardly seemed ordinary, yet inwardly commanded armies of secrets, debts, and desires. She learned to make power seductive, to make fear invisible, and to make history bend quietly, without a single drop of blood spilled in open view. The real cost, the hidden price, was paid by everyone too naive to recognize the web she spun. Let me take you deeper into the rooms where no visitor ever saw the real game being played. Almina Carnarvon's life was a chessboard, and every man, every institution, every whisper of gossip was a piece she moved with precision. Lovers, powerful politicians, military officers, none could resist her. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, nor because she was charming, though she wielded charm like a blade. No, they obeyed her because she understood the invisible architecture of desire and fear. Every affair, every discreet liaison, was meticulously orchestrated. Every secret encounter was a lever that could tilt fortunes, destroy reputations, and even end lives in silence. These were not the reckless dalliances of a frivolous aristocrat. These were strategic acquisitions of influence, currency in the darker economy of power. Almina's relationships were contracts signed in the shadows. A general who owed her discretion, he'd safeguard her property from inspection. A diplomat entangled in her charm, he'd whisper her preferred narratives into the corridors of government. And a politician seduced by her subtlety, he would ensure her name remained untarnished when scandal threatened to erupt. The pattern is clear. Control was always the motive. She learned that men, no matter how powerful, are vulnerable to their own appetites, their own weaknesses. And she became the unseen hand exploiting them, quietly, relentlessly. Even those closest to her could not discern where affection ended and manipulation began. That's the hallmark of true power. Invisibility. The world believes it sees you, but you alone pull the strings. Then there were the rumors, whispers that she sanctioned illegal abortions, that her nursing homes were more than sanctuaries, that they were instruments of control. Women arrived under the guise of care and left altered, indebted, their secrets safely buried. Almina held dominion over the most intimate and sacred aspects of life itself. Birth, death, loyalty, shame, each was a currency she spent to consolidate her influence. It's not cruelty without purpose. It's strategy perfected over decades. The lesson is sharp and uncomfortable. True power is often invisible, operating in the spaces the world pretends not to see. And Almina's genius was to occupy those spaces fully, to turn secrecy into an empire, to ensure that anyone who dared question her would find themselves quietly erased, discredited, or indebted beyond repair. If you are following closely, comment again. Shadows reveal the true throne. Twice. Let the repetition anchor you. The knowledge of hidden control changes perception. Once you see the hidden levers, the world will never appear innocent again. Now, pay attention because this is where the veneer of aristocracy cracks entirely. Almina Carnarvon's power was not only social or sexual, it was financial. Her father's fortune, channeled through her, became more than wealth. It was influence incarnate. Highclere Castle, with its endless corridors and Gothic spires, was a stage for a theater of control. Every coin spent, every donation, every investment was a tool. She didn't merely inherit money, she inherited leverage. The kind that could bankrupt families, topple reputations, and silence enemies before they even spoke. The aristocracy at the time was teetering, drowning in the illusion of inherited permanence. Estates were crumbling, debts mounting, heirs naive. Almina recognized it all as opportunity. She financed rescues of bankrupt peers, but never freely. Each loan, each gift was a trap carefully calibrated. They would owe her loyalty, favors, sometimes silence about affairs that would ruin them. She understood instinctively what the Rothschilds had proven. Money is less a tool than a weapon, invisible, lethal, and impossible to ignore. And yet, her methods were darker still. Blackmail was subtle, pervasive. Letters she allowed to be lost in social circulation. Whispered rumors that accidentally reached the right ears, and discreet threats executed through intermediaries. Scandal could be purchased or it could be suppressed. She learned that fear, when applied with elegance, was more binding than contracts. Powerful men, kings even, adjusted their actions around her invisible influence. No one ever accused her outright. She was always too polite, too refined, too proper. But the consequence of defiance was unmistakable. Ruin arrived quietly, like a shadow crossing a sunlit lawn. And all the while, Almina maintained her charitable persona. Soldiers, widows, the wounded, she cultivated admiration, almost reverence. But understand this, every act of mercy carried a cost. Every life she saved was subtly tethered to her will. Power hides in these paradoxes. Cruelty cloaked in charity, manipulation wrapped in elegance, domination disguised as loyalty. This is the lesson most will never grasp. Those who control perception control reality. Almina's empire wasn't built of armies or titles, but of invisible influence, debts, secrets, shame, and unspoken fear. To walk in her world is to realize that the foundations of society itself, money, bloodlines, reputation, are fragile, pliable, and ultimately dictated by those who understand the dark economy of leverage. Now brace yourself. This is where the human heart is revealed as both weapon and casualty. Lady Almina Carnarvon's life was littered with betrayals, hers and others. Every intimate relationship carried stakes that went far beyond affection. Every friendship, every alliance was a potential battlefield. She learned early that loyalty was conditional, and that moral codes were luxuries she could not afford. The men she married, seduced, or befriended were pawns in her larger strategy, and even those closest to her often discovered the truth too late. Affection in her world was inseparable from leverage. Her affairs were never just desire. They were instruments of power. Diplomats, army officers, aristocrats all became unwitting participants in a network she carefully cultivated. By entwining herself with them, she created layers of obligation, secrets that bound others to her will. And when she deemed it necessary, those obligations became chains, tightening silently until resistance was impossible. She wielded betrayal as an art form, executing it with elegance so refined that no scandal could attach itself to her name. Then there were the consequences of her darker operations. The women who sought refuge under her care, the illegitimate children whose births and fates she orchestrated, the hushed medical procedures she sanctioned, all were echoes of control, tools for maintaining an empire built on secrecy. Few ever survived unmarked by her influence. Those who did often owed her their silence, their loyalty, or a debt that would linger for a lifetime. Almina's world was a crucible where morality and survival were constantly in conflict. She learned to embrace discomfort, to sit with the knowledge that every act of kindness could be a weapon, and every act of cruelty a necessity. Men and women alike were tested against her subtle manipulations, and only those who understood the unspoken rules survived. It was not just about survival. It was about mastery, mastering perception, mastering desire, mastering the invisible currents of society. And here's the truth the elite hope you never realize. Power is never benevolent. It is a system of debts, secrets, and fear. The deeper you go, the more you see it operating in every institution, every family, every circle of influence. Now take a moment. Comment again, twice. Shadows reveal the true throne. Let it settle. This is the threshold where understanding becomes awareness, where knowing Almina's methods begins to reveal the hidden architecture of control in your own world. Now, let us step even deeper, into the spaces few ever glimpse. The rooms where charity and cruelty were indistinguishable, where Almina Carnarvon perfected the art of invisible domination. She built an empire of influence under the guise of benevolence. Soldiers returned from war, mutilated and haunted, and she offered them care, comfort, and a sanctuary. But every act of kindness was layered, calculated. Each favor extracted a hidden debt, a silent compliance. Gratitude became leverage, loyalty, a currency she traded with precision. Behind the polished veneer of her nursing homes, whispers persisted: illegal procedures, discreet disappearances, secrets that erased inconvenient truths. These were not acts of desperation or improvidence. They were tools of governance, the governance of human behavior itself. Almina understood that power is most absolute when it is invisible. Control exercised in silence, in shadows, leaves no witnesses. And for those who thought themselves untouchable, she proved otherwise. Highclere Castle, her name, her fortune, each was a node in a web designed to shape outcomes without ever showing the hand that guided them. Her influence extended beyond individuals. Entire institutions bent to her subtle direction. Letters intercepted, reputations preserved or destroyed, alliances brokered quietly in the corridors of aristocracy, all formed part of a system that few could even see. She was a conductor of invisible symphonies, orchestrating fear and loyalty, pleasure and shame, in equal measure. Every whisper of scandal she allowed, every secret she preserved, reinforced her dominion. The moral calculus of her life is uncomfortable, almost unbearable. She taught that virtue can be a facade, that mercy can conceal coercion, that appearances are instruments of control. Every move was designed to consolidate power, not morality. And in that lesson lies a dangerous truth. History is rarely written by the virtuous, and power is never innocent. To understand Almina is to understand the mechanisms that govern the elite, mechanisms that operate today, silently, invisibly, without acknowledgement. Now, we reach the point where even the most disciplined illusion begins to crumble. Lady Almina Carnarvon, architect of secrets and master of manipulation, faced a reckoning few ever witnessed. For decades, she had wielded power, invisibly turning loyalty into currency, obedience into obligation, and discretion into armor. But power, no matter how cleverly exercised, is never infinite. Every manipulation carries weight. Every secret builds pressure until the smallest fault line can trigger collapse. The first cracks appeared not in public scandal, but in the intimate spaces of her own life. Affairs meant to secure influence turned precarious. Allies became rivals. Those who had once been charmed or intimidated now whispered among themselves, calculating, observing, waiting. Almina had trained everyone to fear and obey, but fear has a cost. It isolates, it breeds resentment, it sharpens the instincts of the cunning. And in the gilded halls of Highclere, behind lace curtains and polished silver, the games she had perfected for decades began to exact their price. Her personal relationships, the very instruments of her empire, became sources of vulnerability. Trust, a commodity she had traded lightly, became scarce. Those who survived her machinations sometimes carried secrets too dangerous to reveal, yet their quiet independence chipped away at her influence. The very secrecy that had protected her also became a prison, each hidden act a reminder that mastery comes at a price. She understood, too late, that absolute control over others cannot shield one from the inevitability of consequence. And still, she maintained the outward image of dignity, aristocratic composure, the grace of charity, the elegance of restraint, all masks that concealed a lifetime of ruthless survival. Yet behind every smile, every invitation, every act of generosity, the undercurrents of manipulation and coercion remained. The empire of shadows she had built was not defeated by scandal or law, but by the relentless, patient erosion of loyalty, by the subtle reclamation of autonomy by those she had controlled. This is the bitter truth. Power gained through secrecy and exploitation can last decades, but it cannot outrun the human cost forever. Every life she touched, every secret she brokered, left fractures that eventually converge. And when they do, even the most cunning cannot fully escape the consequences of the world they have shaped. And now we arrive at the final act, where the grandeur dissolves into silence. May 8, 1969, a quiet house on Park Avenue in Bristol. A frail woman, 93 years old, lies dead, choked by a chicken bone. To the neighbors, She was Mrs. Dennis, a harmless, lonely figure. But the truth is far darker. This was the final chapter of Lady Almina Carnarvon, a woman whose life had moved empires and men, whose wealth and cunning had manipulated kings and generals, whose hands had guided the fates of countless lives, invisible and absolute. Highclere Castle, her gilded empire, had long passed out of her hands. Her fortune had been spent, her secrets gradually unveiled by history's slow, unforgiving eye. Yet the structures she had built, the invisible chains, the manipulations, the whispered threats still lingered, like shadows in an abandoned room. The men she had controlled were gone or humbled. The women she had protected or erased carried their own memories, hidden yet enduring. And Almina herself? Alone, stripped of influence, her power evaporated into history. Death came quietly, almost ironically, a mundane accident for a life that had been anything but ordinary. And this is the final lesson, the one history books will never teach. Mastery over others, over systems, over secrets, is seductive, intoxicating, even godlike in its immediacy. But it exacts a cost, often invisible to the wielder until the very end. Empires of influence crumble. Allies vanish. The carefully constructed illusions of control dissolve. And when the world finally strips away the masks, all that remains is solitude and the echo of a life lived in shadows. Yet, for those who understand, Almina's story is not only a caution, it is a blueprint. Her genius was in her understanding of human nature, in the quiet exertion of invisible leverage, in the orchestration of fear and desire. She revealed how wealth, secrecy, and charisma can bend reality itself. And though she fell, the mechanisms she mastered persist, hidden in plain sight across institutions, governments, and families even today. Remember this: to see the unseen, to understand the invisible levers of power, is to step into a world most fear. History may forget Lady Almina Carnarvon, but her methods endure. The shadows remain. And now you know them. Once you see them, nothing will ever appear innocent again.